Samantha Ridge had always preferred the company of trees and trail cameras to people, but when she captured Brian Knox and Travis Dunn burying something deep in the woods, her quiet life turned into a deadly countdown. A week later, her body was found in a drainage ditch, and the footage she died for would unravel secrets the town of Belmore had buried for years. Samantha Ridge lived a quiet, almost invisible life in the small Oregon town of Belmore. She was the kind of person who kept to herself, friendly but distant, always polite but never one to linger in conversations. Most people in town knew her only as the woman with the cameras, the wildlife photographer who lived on the edge of the forest, where the land dipped into thick woods and old forgotten trails. Her home, a modest single-story cabin with peeling green paint and ivy creeping up the side, sat alone at the end of a gravel road. To most, it seemed like the perfect retreat. To Samantha, it was a place of peace, privacy, and purpose. She spent her days working part-time at the Belmore Nature Reserve, guiding school children through the forest trails and giving lectures on owls, mushrooms, and local plant life. The rest of her time she devoted to photography. Her blog, Wilderness Watch, had a small but dedicated following. She posted videos of elk crossing streams, time-lapsed sunsets, and birds feeding their young. Her most popular posts featured the footage from her trail cameras, motion-triggered devices she placed throughout the forest to capture images of wildlife too shy to come near humans. To her followers, she was an artist of patience. To herself, she was just someone trying to preserve what others ignored. But Samantha's camera didn't always catch animals. Sometimes it caught people, strangers passing through the woods, hikers, campers, the occasional teenager sneaking off for a smoke. These human encounters were rare, but not impossible. So when she reviewed the footage from one of her newer cameras placed near an overgrown trail behind her property, she expected nothing more than maybe a raccoon or a deer. What she found instead chilled her to the bone. It was just after midnight when the camera had been triggered. The video showed two figures, humanoid, dressed in dark clothing, faces hidden by hoods. One of them carried a flashlight with a red filter, casting a faint, eerie glow over the path. The other was dragging something behind them. At first it looked like a sleeping bag, but as it shifted and bent, it became clear that it was something more solid, something wrapped tightly in a stained white sheet. The way it moved, heavy and awkward, suggested it was a body. Samantha watched the clip 3 times. Then she backed it up, frame by frame, trying to find more detail. The faces were obscured. The license plate of the car parked nearby was hidden in the darkness. But there was no doubt about what she was seeing. Someone had dragged what looked like a corpse past her property, through a hidden trail most locals didn't even remember existed. For nearly an hour, Samantha sat in silence. At her desk, her laptop screen glowed in the dark room, casting shadows across the walls. Her hands trembled slightly as she paused the video. She didn't know who to call. The police? Would they take her seriously? She had no hard proof, no faces, no names. Just a grainy video from a motion camera. She saved the footage to a flash drive and backed it up on her external hard drive. Then, oddly, she made a short blog post, just a few words. Caught something strange last night. Reviewing more footage soon. It was unlike her usual posts, which were filled with excitement or appreciation for nature. This one was vague, almost cryptic. She didn't say what she'd seen. She didn't name anyone, or mention the police. That day, she didn't go to work. Her co-workers assumed she was under the weather, and since Samantha often went days without contact when she was focused on editing or photography, no one was alarmed. She spent the next few days reviewing other camera footage, checking if the figures had appeared elsewhere, if they had returned. She combed through her old posts and wondered if she had captured them before, perhaps in the background of an earlier video. There was nothing. The forest seemed unchanged, quiet, peaceful. But now it felt different to her. It felt like a place that had been violated, a place where something dark had taken root. She checked the batteries in her trail cameras, repositioned a few for wider angles, and considered setting up a hidden camera near her own home, just in case. The following evening, she took a walk near the trail where the footage had been recorded. She didn't go far, just enough to stand near the camera. The forest was still, no wind, no birdsong, just the creak of old trees and the crunch of leaves under her boots. She didn't find anything unusual. No fresh footprints, no disturbed earth. But she couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching her, or maybe they still were. When she returned home, she locked every door, closed every curtain, and kept the lights off. Her laptop remained open, paused on the last frame of the video. The two figures, blurry and hunched, were frozen on the screen. Samantha Ridge didn't call the police. She didn't post again. No one saw her leave her house. No one noticed anything strange. But a week later, her body was found in a drainage ditch, miles from her home. Cold, bruised, and wrapped in the same kind of white sheet she had seen in the video. The same kind of sheet she had watched being dragged through the woods, not realizing that she had just recorded her own death in progress. When Samantha Ridge was reported missing, it didn't immediately set off alarms. Belmore was the kind of town where people came and went without making much noise. A missed shift at the nature reserve, a couple of unanswered texts. People assumed she was on one of her photography trips, maybe off the grid capturing something rare. But when 2 full days passed without any word, her co-worker, Erin Markley, grew concerned. She drove out to Samantha's house on a cool Thursday morning and found her car in the driveway, dusted with pollen and untouched. The mailbox was full. The front door was locked, but the back door, usually secured, was slightly ajar. Inside, nothing seemed immediately out of place. The lights were off, but the air smelled faintly stale, like no one had moved through the rooms in days. On the kitchen counter sat a mug with the faint ring of coffee dried at the bottom. Her camera bag leaned against a chair. In the living room, her laptop was open, still running. The screen displayed a paused video, the same grainy footage she had mentioned in her last blog post. The file name was Trailcam North 3 MP4. Erin didn't touch anything. She backed out of the house and called the Belmore Police Department. Within hours, officers arrived and began their search. What they initially found was puzzling. Samantha's phone, wallet, and keys were all in the house. Her shoes were by the door. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows or overturned furniture. Her camera gear, including memory cards and drives, were accounted for. But one of the most important pieces, the video, was gone. The laptop, upon inspection, showed signs of tampering. The video Samantha had paused was no longer playable. It had been manually deleted and the recycle bin had been emptied. But forensic technicians were able to recover fragments of the file. enough to confirm the presence of two unidentified individuals dragging what appeared to be a wrapped body across the forest floor. The footage was grainy, out of focus in parts, and taken in near total darkness, but the implications were clear. Samantha had recorded something criminal, and now she was gone. The investigation widened quickly. Officers canvassed the area around her home, questioning neighbors, hikers, and local workers. Few had seen Samantha in the past week. None had noticed anything strange. No odd vehicles, no loud noises, no suspicious activity. Her nearest neighbor lived nearly half a mile away and hadn't seen her since the previous weekend. Her absence had gone unnoticed in the quiet rhythm of the town. Police turned to her blog for answers. Her final post stood out starkly against her usual cheerful updates. Caught something strange last night. Reviewing more footage soon. There were no comments on it, no follow-ups, and nothing posted afterward. Her last login time matched the timestamp on the deleted video. It became clear to investigators that she had seen something deeply unsettling and had planned to look into it further. Over the next few days, detectives combed through Samantha's digital life. Her email and social media accounts offered little insight. She had no known enemies, no ex-partners with a grudge, no signs of conflict. Her life, as far as anyone could tell, had been calm and ordinary. But the footage suggested she had stumbled onto something hidden, something someone didn't want her to share. The trail cameras were the next focus. Samantha had a dozen placed throughout the forest behind her house, each with its own memory card and motion-triggered recording system. Officers retrieved the devices and began reviewing the footage. Most of the files were filled with harmless wildlife, raccoons, deer, foxes passing through. But two of the cameras, placed deeper into the woods, held disturbing evidence. One camera, located off a narrow, barely visible trail, showed a vehicle parked just inside the tree line on the night Samantha disappeared. It was a dark-colored sedan, with the license plate obscured by mud and foliage. The other camera, positioned near the old fire road, captured a man walking alone through the woods. He wore a hoodie, gloves, and carried a shovel over his shoulder. His face was partially visible, caught in the split-second flash of infrared light. Using enhanced image processing and facial recognition, police were able to identify the man as Brian Knox, a former Belmore resident who had left town 3 years earlier under a cloud of suspicion after being questioned in an unrelated theft investigation. Brian had no recent criminal charges, but his name raised flags. When police checked his last known address in a neighboring county, they found it recently vacated. He had moved out just days before Samantha disappeared. His landlord said he left suddenly, without notice, taking everything he owned. Inside the now empty apartment, investigators found something strange. In a small box near the back of a kitchen cabinet, overlooked at first, was an envelope. Inside were several printed photographs. One showed the back of Samantha's cabin. Another was a close-up of a tree with one of her trail cameras clearly visible. A third was a wide shot of the forest at night, blurry but unmistakable. Samantha's property in the distance, faint lights glowing through her windows. The discovery shifted the case. Samantha hadn't just been a random victim. She had been watched, her routines noted, her technology monitored. Someone had known what she was doing and, more importantly, what she had seen. Her disappearance was not an accident, and her death, still, Unconfirmed, but now more likely than anyone wanted to admit, was starting to look like a calculated effort to silence her. A week later, confirmation came in the worst possible way. A group of teenagers, skipping school and wandering near an old storm drainage site 10 miles outside of town, found her body. She had been wrapped in a sheet, her face bruised, her hands bound. The same kind of sheet seen in her final deleted footage. The autopsy would later reveal signs of blunt force trauma and suffocation. The town of Belmore, once peaceful and overlooked, was now the center of a chilling mystery. A woman who spent her life capturing the beauty of nature had recorded something dark, and someone had made sure she would never speak of it again. The discovery of Samantha Ridge's body sent a shockwave through the town of Belmore. Her death was no longer a theory or an open question. It was a grim, undeniable fact. The trail of evidence that had begun with a strange piece of footage now had a horrifying conclusion. Yet there were still more questions than answers. Who had killed her? Why had she been targeted? And perhaps most importantly, what exactly had she seen? With the recovery of Samantha's body came renewed urgency from investigators. The medical examiner confirmed she had died from a combination of blunt force trauma and asphyxiation. There were signs she had struggled, bruises on her arms and defensive wounds on her hands. She had fought back, but there was no evidence of sexual assault or robbery. Her body had been deliberately placed in a drainage ditch, hidden under brush and debris, in a location few people ventured into. Whoever killed her hadn't been looking for attention. They had wanted her gone, her body hidden, and her silence permanent. But Samantha had left behind more than just a damaged hard drive and a single deleted video. She had been meticulous in her routines, and investigators soon discovered she had backups of her footage stored on memory cards and flash drives hidden throughout her house. Inside a locked drawer in her desk, they found an old external hard drive labeled Cam Archive. It contained hours of footage from trail cameras going back months. Most of it was routine: animals, birds, the occasional hiker. But one particular clip stood out. It was dated nearly a year earlier and showed a car pulling into the woods late at night. The same dark sedan seen in the recent footage. The driver, barely visible, got out and walked into the forest with a large duffel bag slung over their shoulder. There was no return trip caught on camera. Whoever it was had gone in, but hadn't come back the same way. A pattern was beginning to emerge. This wasn't just about Samantha witnessing something by chance. This went back further. Investigators began cross-referencing missing persons reports, and one name caught their attention: Chloe Mercer, a local teenager who had vanished 3 years earlier. No leads, no sightings. She had disappeared during a late summer night after a party near the woods. Her case had gone cold, and most people assumed she had run away. But now, it looked like she might have been buried not far from Samantha's home. Police returned to the area where the original suspicious footage had been captured. Using ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs, they searched the forest inch by inch. It took 3 days before they found the shallow grave. Inside was a partially decomposed body wrapped in deteriorating cloth. Dental records confirmed it was Chloe Mercer. Her remains had been there for years, undisturbed, until someone recently dug them up and tried to move them. That act had triggered everything. Samantha's trail camera had caught the reburial in progress. She hadn't known the identity of the wrapped form, but she had understood the danger of what she was seeing. Forensic analysis confirmed the connection. Fibers from the same sheet Chloe's body had been wrapped in were found near the site where Samantha's body was dumped. This linked both deaths directly. And with the footage from the secondary trail cameras, the investigation turned toward one man, Brian Knox. Brian had a long history with Belmore. He'd grown up there but left after high school. In the years before Chloe's disappearance, he had returned briefly, renting a room in town and working odd jobs. He had been in a casual relationship with Chloe, something she had hidden from her parents. They were an unlikely pair. She was still in school, and he was already in his 20s, with a growing list of arrests for drug use and petty theft. The relationship ended badly, according to those who knew them. Chloe had told a friend she was scared of him. Then, a few weeks later, she vanished. Brian had never been officially named a suspect, but after Chloe's disappearance, he packed up and left town again. Now, it appeared he had returned, likely upon hearing rumors that the wooded area where he'd hidden her body was being cleared for development. His panic had brought him back to Belmore, to erase a mistake he'd buried years earlier. But in trying to cover his tracks, he had made a critical error. He had walked into the view of Samantha's camera. The photo found in his old apartment, showing her house and the trail camera, proved he had been watching. He had known she might have seen something. And when her blog post hinted that she was reviewing strange footage, he must have realized the truth. He acted quickly, deleting the files, silencing her, and attempting to vanish once again. But he hadn't been careful enough. Technology, and Samantha's own habits, had preserved what he tried to destroy. Even in death, she had left a path of evidence behind her. At this point in the investigation, police were convinced Brian was responsible for both Chloe Mercer's death and Samantha Ridge's murder. But they still had to find him. He had slipped away, and despite warrants and alerts, he seemed to have vanished. Still, cracks were forming. A routine crime had turned into something much larger. A missing girl, a silent photographer, a man with a history of violence. The pieces were aligning, and the closer investigators looked, the more they saw. This was no spontaneous act. It was premeditated, and someone else may have been helping him. The manhunt for Brian Knox intensified in the weeks following the discovery of Samantha Ridge's body and the buried remains of Chloe Mercer. With two bodies tied to one suspect and mounting evidence connecting him to both crimes, the case had become national news. Belmore, once a quiet town tucked between forest and foothill, was now under the relentless scrutiny of media, investigators, and the public. But as the search for Brian expanded, disturbing new leads began to emerge. Ones that suggested he hadn't acted alone. Law enforcement agencies tracked Brian's movements in the weeks before Samantha's death. Surveillance footage showed him at a gas station near Belmore, purchasing gloves, duct tape, and a tarp. He was with another man, unidentified, wearing a baseball cap pulled low and speaking only briefly to the cashier. The two drove off together, in the same dark sedan captured by Samantha's trail camera. That was the first concrete sign that Brian had a possible accomplice. Investigators combed through Brian's digital history, searching for any connection to the mystery man. His phone records had been wiped, and he had used a series of burner phones during his return to Belmore. But he had left behind a single clue, a photo on a deleted social media account, recovered from a data archive. It showed him and another man posing at a remote campsite. The second man was later identified as Travis Dunn, a former friend of Brian's from his time in a halfway house outside Portland. Travis had a long rap sheet: trespassing, assault, drug charges. He had dropped off the radar around the same time Brian returned to Belmore. The connection grew darker when investigators discovered that Travis had briefly worked as a trail guide in the same region where Samantha lived. He knew the forests well. He knew how to avoid cameras, how to move unseen through overgrown paths. Police now believed Travis had helped Brian rebury Chloe's body and possibly even participated in Samantha's murder. The thought that two men had been watching her, planning together, added a new layer of horror to the already chilling story. While law enforcement pursued Travis, forensic experts continued to process Samantha's home and belongings. They found something overlooked during the initial sweep: a notebook buried beneath a pile of old hiking maps in her office. It was Samantha's journal, not a diary, but a kind of personal log where she recorded her thoughts, notes about animal patterns, and occasional strange observations from the woods. The last few entries were alarming. One entry described seeing a man near her property, just beyond the tree line. She'd watched him from her window, thinking at first he was a hiker. But he didn't move like one. He stood still facing the cabin before slipping back into the trees. Another entry described hearing sounds at night: snapping branches, the rustle of movement, sometimes faint whispers carried by the wind. She dismissed it at first as her imagination, but the final entry, written just a day before her disappearance, read simply, "I'm being watched. I'm sure of it now." That sentence changed everything. Samantha had realized too late that she wasn't alone out there. The journal confirmed what investigators already feared. Her death was not only about what she saw on the camera, but what she had come to know in those quiet, isolated nights. She had been hunted. Police traced Travis Dunn's last known location to a small town near the Idaho border. He had checked into a roadside motel under a false name and paid in cash. When authorities arrived, the room was abandoned, but inside they found Samantha's missing flash drive hidden beneath the mattress. It was intact, and it contained the full, unedited version of the footage that had been deleted from her laptop. The video left no doubt. It showed Brian and Travis dragging Chloe's exhumed body through the woods, pausing briefly to adjust the sheet she was wrapped in. Their faces were briefly illuminated by the red glow of a flashlight. One of them looked directly at the camera, not realizing it was there. The audio picked up faint conversation, muffled, but clear enough to hear one of them say, "We have to move her. They're clearing this side out soon." It was a calculated move, a cleanup of a crime long buried. The video's timestamp was just 5 days before Samantha's disappearance. In that moment, the footage became the cornerstone of the case. It linked both men to Chloe's death and placed them at the scene with undeniable clarity. More importantly, it proved that Samantha's death was premeditated. She had discovered the truth, and they had come for her. As investigators closed in on Travis, they began to re-examine other unsolved disappearances from the region. Files long archived were reopened. One in particular stood out: a missing forest ranger named Eli Rowe, who vanished 2 years prior while patrolling an area near where Chloe's grave had been found. His body was never recovered. No signs of foul play were ever officially established. But now, with everything known about Brian and Travis, detectives believed he might have gotten too close to something he wasn't supposed to see. Just like Samantha. The scope of the investigation widened again. What began as a single mysterious video had become something much larger. Samantha Ridge had captured a glimpse of evil, and in doing so, she had unwittingly exposed a pattern of violence and secrecy that had stretched for years. She had given investigators the first real break in a cold case no one even knew they were still looking into. But Brian Knox and Travis Dunn were still out there. Somewhere in the vast wooded landscape of the Pacific Northwest, they were running. And now, with the evidence mounting and the manhunt reaching its peak, there was only one question left. How far would they go to stay hidden? Weeks turned into months, and the hunt for Brian Knox and Travis Dunn became one of the most intense fugitive searches in state history. With the discovery of the unedited footage on Samantha Ridge's flash drive, there was no longer room for speculation. The video provided undeniable proof of their involvement in two murders, Chloe Mercer and Samantha herself. It also suggested they might be responsible for more. Every available resource was deployed: aerial surveillance, heat sensing, drones and bloodhounds combing through the dense forests surrounding Belmore and beyond. But the terrain was unforgiving, the wilderness vast, and both men knew how to survive off-grid. Despite the massive search effort, Brian and Travis remained elusive. Investigators believed they had holed up in an abandoned hunting cabin deep in the Cascade foothills, a place Travis had once mentioned to a former roommate during a drug-fueled conversation. The location wasn't listed on any official maps, and even local authorities weren't fully aware of its existence. Search teams discovered signs of recent occupation there: cigarette butts, food wrappers, and a crude fire pit. But the men had vanished before anyone arrived. A few weeks later, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A trail hiker, recording his journey for a nature blog, uploaded drone footage from a remote ridge just south of Belmore. He hadn't noticed anything unusual while filming, but a viewer who followed the case closely spotted two figures moving near the tree line in the background, one carrying what appeared to be a rifle. The timestamp and location matched an area investigators had been narrowing in on. Search teams swarmed the region. Days of tracking finally paid off when officers found Travis Dunn's body in a creek bed below a steep slope. He had fallen to his death while trying to escape through the ravine. His leg was broken in multiple places, and the impact had crushed his skull. The autopsy confirmed he had been dead for less than 48 hours. With him were the remains of a backpack containing freeze-dried food, a hunting knife, and several pages torn from Samantha's notebook. How he had gotten them remained a mystery. Perhaps he had stolen them from her home during the break-in, or taken them off her body before hiding it. The discovery of Travis's body only intensified the manhunt for Brian. If Travis was dead, Brian was now alone and growing desperate. Investigators believed he was heading further west, toward the coast, possibly hoping to stow away on a shipping vessel or disappear into one of the transient encampments along the interstate. But he was running out of options and time. 2 weeks later, a stolen pickup truck was found abandoned near a wildlife refuge 30 miles from Belmore. The vehicle was registered to an elderly couple who had reported it missing a day earlier. Inside the truck was a single item that sealed Brian's fate: Samantha's camera, the one she always carried. The strap was broken, and the memory card was missing, but it was unmistakably hers. It had been wiped clean, likely by Brian in a last-ditch attempt to destroy any remaining evidence. But it proved he was still in the area, and still trying to erase the trail she had left behind. Shortly after, a hunter reported seeing a man fitting Brian's description near a collapsed ranger station deep in the forest. Officers moved in under cover of night, surrounding the area silently. They found Brian hiding beneath the floorboards of the old station, barely conscious, dehydrated, and armed with a pistol he never got the chance to use. He didn't resist. In fact, when officers pulled him out, he reportedly whispered, "It's over." Back in custody, Brian was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, unlawful disposal of human remains, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice. As more evidence emerged, including Travis's journals recovered from their last campsite, a chilling narrative unfolded. Brian and Travis had committed other crimes, assaults, threats, and suspected involvement in at least one more disappearance near the Oregon border. Investigators began coordinating with other jurisdictions to piece together a fuller picture of what the 2 men had done. In court, Brian offered no defense. He waived his right to a trial and accepted a plea deal in exchange for life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole. During sentencing, the judge described Samantha Ridge as a silent witness who, through her persistence and instinct, uncovered a horror most would have ignored. Her family, present in the courtroom, held hands as the judge read the sentence. Chloe Mercer's parents were there too, finally receiving the closure they had long thought would never come. Though Brian Knox was behind bars, the legacy of Samantha's discovery continued to ripple outward. Her blog became a symbol of citizen vigilance, and the footage she captured, once deleted, now archived permanently, was used in training programs for law enforcement and search and rescue teams. A memorial trail was built in her honor through the woods she loved, complete with markers and information stations warning hikers of the dangers of venturing too deep without telling someone. The final irony was that Samantha Ridge, through her passion for wildlife and her habit of watching quietly from a distance, had exposed something monstrous. She had never set out to uncover a crime. She had simply seen what others missed and asked questions no one else was asking. In the end, it cost her everything, but it also stopped a killer. It brought justice to a grieving family, and it reminded the world that even the quietest people can leave behind an echo too loud to ignore.